I just, I don't understand. I'm not good enough.
Why don't I love myself
Why
more?
can't I get these things right?
Time and time again, I just fail.
I'm
and
so
I fail.
exhausted. It's really
I have
overwhelming.
nobody
People don't notice me,
on my side.
and I don't make a
I
difference.
don't feel worthy.
I'm just not going to amount to anything.
I actually have a lot to offer.
People care about me, and they want me
I
around.
am a good friend.
I'm not alone.
God chooses me
I'm
daily.
compassionate and caring.
I'm a child of God.
Hi, my name is John, and I'm the Next Gen pastor here at Crosspoint. I want to say hi and Happy New Year to everyone at all of our campuses and those of you who are watching online. We're in this series called Your New Playlist, where we're talking about trading out the old wrong thoughts that we have that can kind of get stuck in our heads sometimes, like a bad song, and replace those with a new, good, and true thought from God. Several years ago, before living in Tennessee, my family and I moved out to California. But not just anywhere in California. It was the Bay Area of California, Silicon Valley, the home of big tech like Apple and Google and Instagram. It's also the land of high education and colleges like Stanford and Cal. So from the moment our plane touched down and we unpacked our pod, I knew I was surrounded by tons of people, all who were smarter than me and that could do things that I couldn't imagine doing in my wildest daydreams. So, as I started my new job, I was informed that part of my onboarding, like getting started, would be meeting with a woman that helped to lead, connect, and start churches all over Silicon Valley. In other words, she was the smart person that all the other smart people chose to lead them. And she happened to be the wife of my boss's boss. But that meeting would be on Monday. On Friday, my wife and I took the family out to the beach for what I thought would be just 20 minutes. It was cloudy, and so I didn't put on any sunscreen. Only those 20 minutes turned into 2 hours. When I got home, I realized I had the worst sunburn of my life, and I was redder than a lobster. Everything hurt like crazy. I was using up gallons of aloe. I'm pretty sure I used an entire cactus. So Monday rolls around, and this is the day of the big meeting. And I get to the office early to prepare, and I notice that I'm starting to peel. And not only am I peeling, but I have this overwhelming itch that has just taken over. So I run down to Walgreens, down the street, I grab some aloe, I go back to the bathroom, I slather it on, so much so that it's not like coming through my shirt. So in an effort to create a barrier between the aloe and my clothes, I actually start stuffing paper towels like down my shirt and all throughout my body. And so by the time I get to my boss's boss wife, like the smart lady's office, I'm just like covered in paper towels. And I'm just a little bit exhausted and I'm a little bit nervous. And she opens up the door and she points me to a broken chair that is really low to the floor. So I'm having to do this balancing act the entire time that we're meeting. And as we get through the end of the conversation, by this time, the paper towels underneath my shirt have begun to dry up. And she begins to notice. And every time I move, there's this crunching sound that begins to stir up. And she's looking underneath there. She's like, there's something happening underneath there, but she's kind enough not to say anything. By the time we wrap up our discussion, I am out of there and I'm on my way to my car, just thinking, what in the world just happened? How dumb could I be? I'm such a moron. She's going to think I'm dumb, and then she's going to tell my boss's boss, and he's going to think I'm dumb. And then, wow, I'm only 1 week into this job, and I've already blown it. And then I'm going to get fired because they don't think I'm smart enough for this job. And then I'll have to find another job, and my family will have to move yet again, all because I'm the doofus that couldn't remember to use sunscreen. You see what I did there? I started to spin out. Why in the world would I begin to shame and embarrass myself and even begin to call myself names? And we do this, right? When things don't go the way we want them to, or we mess up, or we make mistakes, we can be really super hard on ourselves, can't we? And that voice that we hear that tells us that we'll never measure up and that we'll never be good enough, it actually has a name. It's called the inner critic. But what if I told you that there's a way for us to quickly bounce back from any mistake and actually silence the inner critic? And if you can silence the inner critic, it's proven that you will greatly improve at skills, you'll be more resilient, you'll perform better, you'll have lower anxiety, you'll be more responsible, and you'll actually take on more ownership of your mistakes. And instead of actually beating yourself up for those mistakes or the things that you do wrong, you can actually learn from them and at the same time live more freely. Well, there actually is a way to do all of that. And Jesus shows us the way in a conversation with a man that shows up in the book of Mark. In the book of Mark, there's a scene where some Bible experts come up to Jesus and they try to trick Jesus into saying something wrong. They ask Jesus, "Hey, so what's the most important commandment?" Now, when we think of commandments, we might think of something like the 10 Commandments. But when the Bible experts begin to question Jesus, they're actually thinking about the entire Hebrew Bible, which we call the Old Testament. And in those 39 books, there aren't just 10 commandments or 100 commandments or even 500 commandments. There are 613 commandments. How in the world was Jesus going to pick what was the most important one of 613 commandments? It's like saying that some of God's words or rules are better than others and that some of God's words aren't important at all. But Jesus, being God, knows exactly what words to use because he said them. The law is, in fact, his very own words. Jesus is the author of the law. So Jesus answers the Bible expert by saying to him the prayer that that man would have said 3 or even more times a day. Something that would have been precious to him. Something that would have been personal. And Jesus in Hebrew says, "Shema Israel, Adonai Elokeinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your mind and with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your strength." And then Jesus gives the Bible expert a bonus. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. The Bible experts are actually so impressed with the answer that Jesus gives them that no one dares try to trick or test Jesus from that point forward. So you might be thinking, "Oh, that's great, John. But what does that have to do with the inner critic that you mentioned earlier?" Well, I think there's at least 2 key takeaways that we can have here. The first one is God is a God of love, not harsh criticism. Love the Lord your God. His voice is like a voice of love. A lot of us know the verse John 3:16, but the verse right after it is just as important. Jesus himself says that he did not come to condemn the world, but he came to save it. So if we hear a voice that is condemning, that tells us how dumb we are, or that we've messed up, we can just know that it's not the voice of God. His voice is a voice of love. Next, we can take a look at the second commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. The thought here is that we would love others the way that we love ourselves. But to do that, we actually have to first love ourselves. To drive this point home a little bit further, we could even flip this verse around. Love yourself as you would love a neighbor. Can we be honest? Many of us talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to our neighbor or anyone else for that matter. If we were to talk to other people the way that we talk to ourselves sometimes, people would think that we're the biggest jerks on the planet. Man, I can't stand the fact that you missed that shot. What's wrong with you? Don't you know the game was that on the line? We can never depend on you. No wonder he didn't ask you out. Can you believe how hideous you look? See, these are things that we would never say to someone else, yet alone we say them to ourselves. Why? Because many of us haven't learned how to love ourselves the way that God loves us. Now hear me. When I say loving ourselves, I'm not saying this in like some self-obsessed kind of way, like where you have your camera roll just full of nothing but selfies. But instead, loving yourself means seeing you the way, the person that God made you to be and valuing you in the way that God does. One of the ways that we can actually love ourselves is through something called self-compassion. It's even as a writer, Kristen Neff put it, fierce self-compassion. Like it's going to actually take some energy. You can think of self-compassion as a way to recover or deal with shame when we mess up or when we make a mistake or just do something wrong. And having compassion on ourselves is actually a command that Paul writes in the book of Colossians. Paul writes, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." What I'm about to share with you about self-compassion might feel a little backwards, upside down, counterintuitive at first. But hey, new things can often feel that way. I call this the Michael Jordan effect. You see, I grew up in the 90s and I was lucky enough to actually see Michael Jordan win some championships. I'm 6'7", in case you were wondering. And if you guessed that I played basketball, you would be wrong. But there's this interesting thing that Michael Jordan would do to recover whenever there's a timeout or when there's time for free throws. And there's actually some pretty famous pictures of Michael Jordan doing this. He was holding his shorts or holding onto his knees. And he was actually told by his trainer to do this anytime between plays that he had a chance to rest. Now, this was super strange at the time because at the time, every trainer was telling their athletes, put your hands behind your head to recover. And trainers were telling these athletes over and over and over again, don't put your hands on your knees, put your hands behind your head. It'll help you breathe better. One team took it so seriously that they fined players $100 every time they did it. So MJ's out there doing the thing that everyone is being told not to do, holding onto his shorts, holding onto his knees. A few years ago, they did this research study and to try to test recovery time, like what is the best body position so that you can recover and get the most oxygen back in your lungs. And guess what researchers discovered? It turns out that MJ's trainer was absolutely right. That putting hands on your knees between short breaks actually helps a person recover twice as fast. And today, if you look out at the court during a game, you'll see players holding onto their shorts or putting their hands on their knees. It felt backwards at the time for everyone else, but that's kind of what self-compassion can be like. It's easy to pile on the pressure and be super hard with ourselves to be better, which a lot of people do. But we can actually do something that is way more effective. We can have self-compassion. And here's what self-compassion can actually look like. It actually has 3 parts. First, we get mindful, we get aware. We recognize that we're feeling bad about ourselves, that we did something or something about us or something happened to us and we can't accept the situation. As an example, let's use something super embarrassing. I don't know, let's say like getting a mega sunburn because we forgot to wear sunscreen and then we got to go to a super important meeting because that never happens. It's easy to get super wrapped up in trying to fixate on what happened and how we failed and recognize how we're feeling. If I had stopped and thought, yeah, this right here, this is embarrassing. That's exactly what this is. This is embarrassing. I would have been well on my way to feeling better already. The second part of the process of self-compassion is called common humanity. Or in other words, this kind of stuff happens. And it happens to a lot of people. I'm not the only person that has ever experienced what's happening right now. I'm not the only person to ever get sunburned, and I certainly won't be the last. And I'll probably get sunburned again at some point. But everyone makes mistakes, and I'm not alone in that. This leads us to the third part of self-compassion, and it's called self-kindness. Is getting sunburned something that I wanted to have happen? Absolutely not. Right now, the only thing I can do is put on some aloe, let myself heal, and do my best to learn from it. It's going to be okay. So in order to be self-compassionate, we must be mindful, just aware. We got to remember that there are many people who have experienced similar things like we are, and we can be kind to ourselves. This is a way in which we can love ourselves. See how much better that is than beating ourselves up for messing up? I was a wreck when I walked into Super Smart Lady's office, but I had to go through the process of being self-compassionate to myself. had I gone through that process, I probably would have been a whole lot better off. Now, you might say, hey, John, that's a sunburn. We've got way bigger problems than that. Okay, you're totally right. And I have bigger problems than that too. There are much bigger things out there than sunburns. Bombing the ACT. Someone posting a photo that you wouldn't want your dog to see, let alone the entire world. Wrecking your mom's car. That brutal comment that someone made. Being left out yet again. Getting diagnosed with that thing that you would not wish on your worst enemy. And the list goes on and on and on. Self-compassion applies here too. As we wrap up here, there's one last important thing to mention. God is with us through everything that we experience. This is, in fact, the most important thing. In fact, we have a God who chose to become human so that he himself could experience the things that we do. We have a God that knows exactly what it's like to go through the things that we are going through, and we are never alone in it. And the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross takes care of every mistake, every error, and every sin that you've ever done and every sin that you ever will do. And if you have given your life to Jesus, he takes care of all of it. So what does this mean for us? Well, it means we can quiet the critic instead. We can listen to the voice of God. We can listen to the voice of love. We can change our playlist. We can quiet the critic and learn to love ourselves the way that God does. God has a much better soundtrack for you.